Joanna Jenkins was last seen on November 1st, 1977, at the bridge in Oak Hill, Ohio. At the time of her disappearance, Jenkins had been living with her boyfriend. Her disappearance occurred shortly after they were both arrested for robbery, and she has never been heard from again. Jenkins' sister described her as someone who had always exhibited strange behaviors, which led their mother to suspect she might have mental health issues. At one point, their mother had Jenkins admitted to a hospital for evaluation. According to her sister, it was not unusual for Jenkins to vanish without warning. On one occasion, she left the state with a boyfriend and was gone for months before returning. After her disappearance, two members of Jenkins' family went to her boyfriend's parents' home seeking answers. However, they were chased off the property with shotguns, which left them unable to gather any information about Joanna's whereabouts. Foul play is strongly suspected in her case, and witness accounts have further fueled these suspicions. One witness who spoke with Jenkins prior to her disappearance recalled that she had been involved in a physical altercation with a man she was dating. Jenkins confided that the man had threatened to kill her. When the witness later confronted this same man about the incident, he reportedly admitted to killing Joanna and claimed to have thrown her body into a well. Another account came from a witness who described an incident at the trailer Jenkins shared with her boyfriend. According to this witness, Jenkins walked in on her boyfriend with another woman. Upset, she stormed out of the trailer. The boyfriend allegedly followed her, then returned alone and ominously told the other woman that if she ever behaved as Joanna had, she would end up at the bottom of a well, just like Joanna. Authorities have since considered the possibility that Jenkins's remains may be located in a well near the house where she grew up. However, they have been unable to secure a warrant to search the well, as they lack sufficient evidence to justify the search. Despite these troubling accounts and lingering suspicions, no arrests have been made, and the case remains unsolved. Jenkins's former boyfriend is reportedly still living in Oak Hill, Ohio, to this day. Investigators continue to search for answers in Joanna's disappearance, but decades later, her fate remains a mystery. James Highsong was last seen at 10:15 a.m. on March 15, 1993, when he took off from Toledo Suburban Airport in Ohio, piloting a two-seater 1974 Piper Cherokee Aero that he had rented. Highsong, an accomplished pilot, had attended Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida, for 1 year. While he did not meet the requirements for graduation, he gained valuable flying experience during his time at the university. In January 1993, just 2 months before his disappearance, he began flying out of Toledo Suburban Airport regularly. On the day he vanished, Highsong told others that he planned to fly approximately 55 miles to Jackson, Michigan, where he intended to take a test to become a certified flight instructor. He did not file a flight plan for the trip, which was supposed to be a routine flight, lasting about 20 minutes. However, Federal Aviation Administration air logs revealed a puzzling flight path. After climbing to 4,800 feet, Highsong's plane bypassed the Jackson, Michigan airport by several miles to the southeast. Instead of landing, the plane continued to fly further north, passing the Michigan cities of Grand Rapids and Grand Haven before heading out over Lake Michigan. About an hour after takeoff, the plane disappeared from radar, leaving no trace of Highsong or the aircraft. An extensive search for Highsong and the plane ensued. Authorities employed sonar imaging technology and conducted thorough sweeps of Lake Michigan, but the search yielded no results. Neither wreckage nor parts of the aircraft were recovered. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the case, but found no definitive evidence of a crash or what might have caused one. Nevertheless, they ruled that Highsong was presumed dead. Interestingly, the aircraft, valued at $40,000, was later listed on the FAA database as stolen. Its tail number, N15206, became a key detail in the investigation. In the years following Highsong's disappearance, the FAA received reports of pilots using the tail number N15206 on 4 separate occasions. These instances occurred either during radio checks or while purchasing fuel. However, no one physically saw a plane bearing that tail number after Highsong vanished. The owner of the plane eventually filed an insurance claim for its loss and received a payout. The circumstances surrounding Highsong's disappearance have given rise to 2 primary theories. The first is that Highsong accidentally or intentionally crashed into Lake Michigan, causing the plane to sink and leaving no visible evidence behind. Many investigators favor this explanation due to the trajectory of the flight and its abrupt disappearance over the lake. The second theory, supported by a private investigator hired by Highsong's parents, suggests something far more sinister. The investigator theorizes that Highsong intentionally stole the plane, possibly to sell it on the black market. This theory posits that Highsong may have gotten involved with the wrong people and subsequently met with foul play. At the time of his disappearance, Highsong lived in Sylvania Township, Ohio. While his parents eventually relocated to Florida, they have continued to search for answers about what happened to their son. Law enforcement agencies also continue to investigate his disappearance. Decades later, James Highsong's case remains unsolved, shrouded in mystery and unanswered questions. James Hutchinson, a first grader at Rosa Parks Elementary School, lived in Middletown, Ohio, in February 2021. On the morning of February 28th, his mother, Brittany L. Gosney, and her boyfriend, James Russell Hamilton, reported him missing to the police. However, their conflicting accounts of his disappearance quickly unraveled, and both eventually admitted that James was dead. Gosney later confessed to taking James, then 6 years old, and his older siblings, aged 7 and 9, to Rush Run Nature Preserve in Preble County, Ohio, at approximately 3:00 a.m. on February 27th, with the intent to abandon all 3 children. After dropping them off, James desperately tried to climb back into the car, clinging to the door handle as Gosney began to drive away. She dragged him a distance before he fell, fatally striking his head on the pavement. Roughly 30 to 40 minutes later, Gosney returned to the preserve and found James dead in the parking lot. She loaded his body into the car, brought it home to Crawford Street in Middletown, and returned with her other 2 children. Later that night, while the children were asleep, Gosney and Hamilton moved James's body into the car. They tied it to a cinder block, drove to the Ohio River near Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and threw it off the I-275 bridge. Authorities arrested Gosney and Hamilton, uncovering details of the abuse that had occurred in the household. Gosney admitted Hamilton had been abusive toward all 3 children, and that he had pressured her to abandon them. According to Gosney, Hamilton suggested leaving the children at the nature preserve so coyotes could eat them. She reportedly proposed taking them to a firehouse instead, but Hamilton refused. Hamilton himself admitted to hog-tying the children, gagging them with cloth, and leaving them bound for hours. Gosney was charged with multiple crimes, including murder, child endangerment, kidnapping, gross abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. In August 2021, Hamilton pleaded guilty to kidnapping, gross abuse of a corpse, and 2 counts of child endangerment. He received the maximum sentence of 19 years in prison with parole eligibility after 15 years. Gosney also pleaded guilty to several charges, including murder, and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Extensive searches of the Ohio River failed to locate James's remains, but authorities believe he was murdered due to the horrific circumstances of the case. He was remembered as a sweet and caring boy who brought joy to those around him. John Hunley and his best friend, James McQuery, disappeared together on October 15, 1964. The boys were last seen walking to John's home in Fairfax, Ohio, after leaving the Frisch's restaurant located in the 4700 block of Worcester Pike in Cincinnati at approximately 4:00 p.m. Neither of them were ever heard from again. When they failed to return home, they were reported missing around 10:30 p.m. that evening. At the time of their disappearance, John and James were both third graders and inseparable friends who were often seen together. Before they vanished, John reportedly mentioned to some friends that he was thinking about running away. Acting on this, local authorities initially operated under the theory that the boys may have hopped on a freight train and ridden out of town. Police issued nationwide alerts to law enforcement agencies, but as time passed without any sightings or leads, the runaway theory was abandoned. The disappearances occurred only 2 months after the murder of a 4-year-old girl in Fairfax in August 1964. Her body was found just days after she vanished, and a 13-year-old neighbor boy confessed to killing her. This proximity in time and location led to speculation that the cases could be related, but authorities later stated they could not find any evidence linking the girl's murder to the disappearance of John and James. 3 years later, in 1967, a 17-year-old Marine stationed in California confessed to murdering the boys. He claimed that he had stabbed John and James to death and buried their bodies. The young man had lived in Fairfax at the time of the disappearances. However, he later recanted his confession, saying he fabricated the story as a way to escape the military. After passing a polygraph test, authorities dismissed him as a suspect, and he has maintained his innocence ever since. Despite extensive investigations and searches, very little evidence has ever been found in the disappearances of John Hunley and James McQuery. The two boys lived only about 3 blocks apart in 1964. Authorities now believe their bodies are likely somewhere in the Fairfax area, but the case remains unsolved. Paris Hopson was last seen in Massillon, Ohio, on Christmas Day, 2019. She lived with her mother in Columbus, Ohio, but was visiting family in Massillon, where she had grown up, for the holiday, during a family gathering at her grandparents' home on Shriver Avenue Southeast. Paris appeared anxious and was seen pacing back and forth. Just after 2:30 p.m., she told her family she was going for a walk in the neighborhood to clear her head. It's believed she may have planned to walk to Shriver Park, which was nearby on 3rd Street. Paris left behind all of her belongings, including her car, wallet, credit cards, and cellular phone. She has never been heard from or seen again. In 2017, Paris's brother was critically injured in a car accident when another driver caused a head-on collision and then fled the scene. Her brother remained on life support for months and passed away in 2018 at the age of 23. He was Paris's only sibling, and his death profoundly impacted her. The other driver involved in the crash was never identified, and Paris had been actively trying to find out who they were. It's unclear whether her brother's tragic death had any connection to her disappearance. According to her family, Paris was not involved with drugs, nor did she suffer from any mental illness. They described her as someone who had no reason to leave her life behind. Paris was a graduate of Washington High School and Cleveland State University and, at the time of her disappearance, worked in an administrative position for an insurance company. Prior to that, she had worked as an event planner. Paris's cousin stated that Paris had been dating a man who appeared to be trying to alienate her from her loved ones. However, it remains unclear if this man had any involvement in her disappearance. The circumstances surrounding Paris Hopson's disappearance remain unclear. Her case remains unsolved. Ruth Lor was last seen on the evening of August 29, 1994, at her daughter's residence in Port Washington, Ohio. Ruth had been staying at her daughter's house while she underwent treatment for cancer, but on that evening, she felt well enough to return to her own home, which was just 2 miles away. After gathering her belongings, she left her daughter's house, intending to spend the night at her own place. Ruth had made plans to meet her sister for breakfast the following morning. However, when her sister arrived at Ruth's home at 8 a.m. the next day, no one answered the door. Concerned, Ruth's daughter and son-in-law went to check on her and discovered signs of a violent abduction. The back door frame of Ruth's house had been splintered, and a red telephone cord was missing. Ruth's glasses were left behind on her pillow, indicating she had been taken unexpectedly in the middle of the night. Ruth was never heard from again. Witnesses later reported seeing Ruth's red 1989 Buick Skylark being driven around Newcomerstown, Ohio, between 9 o'clock and 10 p.m. On the night she went missing. The driver of the car was identified as 22-year-old Louis Eugene Gilbert II, who had recently been released from prison after serving time for theft, breaking and entering, and child endangerment. Around the same time, 16-year-old Eric Alvin Elliott was also reported missing, and after an investigation, police determined he had been with Gilbert. The following day, Ruth's car was discovered abandoned in Fulton County, Missouri, about 150 yards away from the scene where an elderly couple, Flossie and William Brewer, had been murdered in their basement. Their vehicle had also been stolen. Authorities quickly connected the Brewer murders to Ruth's disappearance and launched an interstate manhunt for Gilbert and Elliott. On September 4th, just days after Ruth's disappearance, the body of a fourth victim, Roxy Lynn Ruddell, was discovered in the woods near Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The Brewers' car had been abandoned near the crime scene, and Ruddell's truck had been stolen. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Gilbert and Elliott were on a violent crime spree across several states. Finally, on September 6th, a week after their spree began, Gilbert and Elliott were apprehended in New Mexico. Elliott was initially tried in Oklahoma for the murder of Ruddell in 1995. During his trial, Elliott claimed that he had stayed with Gilbert out of fear for his life and that he was not involved in the murders. The jury was unable to reach a verdict, and a second trial was scheduled. However, just before the second trial was set to begin, Elliott pled guilty to the murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gilbert was sentenced to death for Ruddell's murder. In 2002, he was convicted for the Brewers' murders in Missouri and received another death sentence. After his conviction in Missouri, Gilbert agreed to meet with Ruth's son-in-law and admitted to killing Ruth. He also expressed remorse for his actions and asked for forgiveness. During this meeting, Gilbert provided a chilling confession. He explained that he and Elliott had planned to run away to California, where they intended to kill homosexual people in order to make their way across the country. However, they needed a car to continue their journey. Gilbert and Elliott walked about 8 miles from Newcomerstown to Ruth's house outside Port Washington, where they saw Ruth's car parked outside. They were trying to find the keys when Ruth came outside and saw them. A struggle ensued, and Gilbert and Elliott tied Ruth up with the phone cord before forcing her into the trunk of the car. As they drove along backcountry roads, Gilbert recalled that Ruth, aware of her terminal cancer, said to them, "You might as well kill me because I have cancer." Gilbert stated that at this point, they decided to kill Ruth and dumped her body along a back road, though Gilbert was unable to provide the exact location of the body despite drawing a map for authorities. Searches were conducted in the area Gilbert indicated, but Ruth's body was never found. Gilbert was executed in Oklahoma in 2003 for his crimes, while Elliott remains in prison, serving a life sentence. Ruth's body has never been located, and while no formal charges have been filed for her presumed death, authorities strongly suspect foul play based on the confessions of Gilbert and the violent nature of the crimes connected to her disappearance. Despite the confession and Gilbert's execution, Ruth's case remains unresolved, and her body has never been recovered. Megan Lancaster was last seen on April 3rd, 2013, in Wheelersburg, Ohio. She had planned to run errands and then return to her parents' home that night, but she never arrived. Megan has never been heard from again. 2 days later, her car, a white 1999 Mercedes-Benz, was discovered abandoned at a Rally's fast food restaurant in Portsmouth, Ohio. Her wallet was found on the passenger seat, but there was no sign of her. Megan struggled with addiction, before her disappearance, and sometimes turned to prostitution to support her drug habit. Despite her struggles, she was a devoted mother to her 7-year-old son, who was in the care of his grandmother at the time. Megan's family emphasized that she adored her son and maintained daily contact with her loved ones prior to vanishing, making her disappearance especially alarming. Authorities believe Megan's case may be connected to other missing and deceased women in the area, including Jamie Bowen, Holly Logan, Wanda Lemons, and Charlotte Trago, as well as the suspicious deaths of Tamika Lynch and Tiffany Sayer. These women shared commonalities, such as struggles with drug addiction, connections to specific people, and involvement in high-risk lifestyles. This series of disappearances and deaths has sparked speculation about the possibility of a serial killer operating in the region, particularly in and around Portsmouth, Ohio. However, law enforcement has not named any suspects, and the cases remain unsolved. Megan's family continues to search for answers, holding on to hope for justice and closure in her case. The Portsmouth Police Department is actively investigating Megan Lancaster's disappearance, but years later, her fate remains a mystery. #, investigating agency Portsmouth Police Department phone 740-354-1600 source information. Namas, Charlie Project, Ohio Attorney General's Office. Nyo Latimore was last seen in Cincinnati, Ohio on December 4, 2020, alongside his mother, Nyo Latimore, who lived with him on Melrose Avenue in the Walnut Hills area. On December 12th, Nyo's body was found inside a body bag near the Purple People Bridge on the Ohio River. She had been stabbed to death. A blood-stained Paw Patrol blanket belonging to Nyo was found nearby, and his stroller was later recovered from the river. Authorities believe Nyo was killed on December 5th by her boyfriend, Deshaun Brown, after neighbors reported hearing the sounds of a violent struggle in her apartment. Investigators suspect Brown threw Nyo into the Ohio River, still alive, on December 6th, 5 days before he disposed of Nyo's body. Brown, who had purchased a body bag from eBay, took an Uber to the river to dump her remains, claiming the bag contained his clothes because he was moving out. He was arrested and charged with murder, felonious assault, gross abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence, with additional charges filed in February 2021 for Nyo's murder. Prosecutors believe Brown killed Nyo and Nyo out of revenge, blaming her for miscarrying his child. He is currently awaiting trial, scheduled for January 2025, where the death penalty is being sought due to the heinous nature of the crimes. Despite extensive searches, Nyo's body has never been found, though foul play is presumed. On February 11, 1976, in Kettering, Ohio, Lori Lloyd was babysitting with a friend at her home, taking care of her 2-year-old nephew while her mother stopped by to drop off a pizza for them. Lori thanked her mom and showed no signs of anything unusual. This would be the last time her mother saw her daughter. Later that night, after midnight, Lori's mother returned to the house and noticed Lori was missing. Lori's friend and her nephew were still asleep, and when the friend woke up, she told Lori's mother that Lori had gone to a nearby convenience store about 3 blocks away to buy cigarettes. However, the store employee confirmed that Lori never arrived at the store that night. Desperate, Lori's mother searched the area in her car, but found no trace of her daughter. A knapsack that had been in the house also vanished at the same time, though Lori's purse, Bible, and private phone book remained behind. One of Lori's friends later claimed that Lori had planned to meet a boy that night who supposedly promised to take her to California to live with her father, but this boy has never been identified, and there's no evidence that he even existed. Though Lori had a history of running away from home, she always called her family to reassure them that she was okay, which made her sudden disappearance all the more baffling. Since she vanished, she hasn't contacted anyone, and she left behind her personal belongings, including clothing and a small amount of money in her savings account. Her mother later shared that Lori had seemed happy and was doing well in her life. She worked as a teacher's aide, participated in tumbling and track, and had no apparent issues. For years after Lori went missing, her family traveled to California. While watching a documentary about the drug angel dust, they noticed a young woman in the film who resembled Lori. They reached out to the filmmakers, Dave Bell Associates, and the producers tried to investigate, but the girl in the film had never signed a release and was never identified. It remains unclear whether or not this woman was Lori. A documentary about Lori's disappearance, Whatever Happened to Lori Jean Lloyd, was released in 1981, but it yielded no new leads. In 2004, a mistaken report surfaced claiming Lori had been found, but it turned out to be false. Lori's case remains unsolved, with no trace of her or any solid evidence to explain what happened to her that night. Christopher Lurch was last seen in Columbus, Ohio, on August 14, 1982, along with his wife Peggy. The couple disappeared after being last seen at the apartment of William Dean Wickline, Jr., a friend with whom they had been drinking heavily and using cocaine. In 1985, Wickline was convicted of their murders, receiving a life sentence for Christopher's death and a death sentence for Peggy's. Wickline's girlfriend, Teresa Kemp, testified that an argument broke out between Wickline and Christopher over a $6,000 drug debt. She stated that Wickline slit Christopher's throat and then strangled Peggy, who had been sleeping. According to Kemp, Wickline dismembered their bodies and disposed of the remains in trash bins throughout the city. Authorities found blood evidence in Wickline's bathtub and human tissue on a folding saw, but no body parts were ever recovered. Wickline, who was also indicted for an unrelated 1979 murder, but not tried due to his death row status, maintained his innocence in the Lurch case. He was executed in 2004. Despite his conviction, Christopher and Peggy's remains have never been found. "39-year-old Dave Box of Loveland, Ohio, worked as a pipefitter at the sprawling 1,050-acre feed materials production center in the small rural community of Fernald, Ohio. On the surface, Fernald seemed like any other quiet, agricultural area located about 20 miles northwest of Cincinnati. The facility, however, was anything but ordinary, run by a private company, National Lead of Ohio. The site operated in deep secrecy. Few knew that NLO and its Fernald plant were, in reality, owned by the Department of Energy. Between 1953 and 1989, this hidden facility was one of the few in the United States tasked with processing high-grade uranium for nuclear weapons. For years, the Fernald plant was the community's main employer. Many workers who joined the operation were given little to no information about the true nature of their jobs or the health risks involved. Former employee Harry Easterling recalled that when he was first hired, he was assured the plant handled only low-level radiation. Management insisted there was nothing to worry about and nothing that would bother him. They instructed him to keep his work secret, reassuring him that everything would be fine. As the years passed, however, it became clear that conditions inside the facility were far from fine. In the fall of 1984, a scandal erupted that shook the Fernald community and exposed the grim truth about the plant's operations. A massive accident released radioactive smoke into the air. Investigations later revealed that, over the facility's 3 decades of operation, more than 200 tons of radioactive dust particles had been discharged into the atmosphere and local water systems. Fernald residents came to realize that their community, hidden behind promises and platitudes, had essentially become the 3rd largest nuclear waste dump in the country. The outrage only grew when it was revealed that the government officials overseeing the site had been well aware of these dangers. They had not only failed to fix the problems, but also actively downplayed the risks to both employees and residents. One worker brought in to assess the plant's safety described the operations as terribly inadequate, estimating that half of the facility's maintenance tasks were being dangerously mishandled. Despite raising these concerns, he found that many of the plant's managers seemed indifferent to the dangers. The community's trust in the government was shattered. Investigative reporter D.C. Cole, who has spent years researching the facility, believes the environmental disaster was just one piece of a larger tragedy. According to Cole, if anyone were to survey the residents of Fernald, they would find a profound sense of betrayal. Few in the community trusted the government anymore. This broader scandal unfolded just months after a separate, deeply disturbing incident, the disappearance of Dave Box. On June 18, 1984, Dave vanished while on the job at the Fernald facility. Though his body was never officially recovered, the discovery of some of his personal belongings and other clues led to the grim presumption that he was dead and that he had met a horrifying end. Company officials and law enforcement ruled out foul play, but Dave's family and friends believed otherwise. They were certain he had been murdered, and they were determined to uncover the truth about what happened that night. Dave's story began far from Fernald, in Staten Island, New York, where he was born in 1944. When he was still a child, his family relocated to Ohio. In 1966, Dave married Caroline Nogler, and together they built a family, welcoming 2 sons, Tony and Matt, and a daughter, Casey. Although Dave and Caroline divorced in 1979, he remained deeply devoted to her and their children. Those who knew him described him as kind, hard-working, and reliable. In 1981, he joined NLO as a pipe fitter in the facility's maintenance department. He quickly earned the respect of his co-workers, who appreciated his steady, thoughtful approach to his work. Dave's daughter Casey later described him as a loving father who would do anything for his family. Dave worked the graveyard shift from midnight to 8:30 a.m. His routine was a familiar one. On the night of June 18, 1984, he began his shift like he always did. At 11 p.m., he met his rideshare partner, Harry Easterling, in the parking lot of a local White Castle restaurant. Harry drove the two of them to the facility, a trip that had become almost ritualistic for the pair. Harry recalled that the ride was unremarkable. Dave talked about a recent vacation with his kids and mentioned that he had bought a new lunchbox for work. To Harry, everything about that night seemed normal. At the facility, Dave and Harry changed into their work clothes, stored their belongings, and stepped through the sanitizing showers to begin their shift. Around midnight, they reported to the maintenance room to receive their assignments. On this particular night, Dave was tasked with inspecting a pump in Plant 8, a routine job. His supervisor, Charlie Schaus, instructed him to check with another co-worker about the specific pump in question. As Harry recalled, it all seemed like business as usual. Dave opened his toolbox, leaving the lock and keys resting on top of it, and headed off to Plant 8. Throughout the night, Harry and Dave worked separately. Around 4 a.m., a witness spotted Dave sitting in a parked pickup truck with Schaus. The witness later reported that the two men appeared to be having a serious discussion. Despite the sweltering summer humidity, the windows of the truck were rolled up, which struck the witness as odd. Shortly after this encounter, Dave and Harry took their scheduled lunch break. They clocked back in at 4:46 a.m., then split up to continue their assignments. About 15 minutes later, at 5 a.m., the same witness who had seen Dave in the truck spotted him again, this time walking toward Plant 4, not Plant 8, where he was supposed to be working. The witness offered to help Dave with his tasks, but Dave declined, replying, "Oh, okay, no problem." That would be the last confirmed sighting of Dave Box. Around the same time, Schaus reportedly ran into Dave in Plant 4, where the two spoke for about 10 minutes before parting ways. Whatever they discussed remains a mystery. As the morning wore on, Harry began to grow uneasy. By 7 a.m., a safety meeting was held in a conference room in Plant 4. Dave was noticeably absent. After the meeting ended, Harry went back to the maintenance room and put his tools away. There, he found Dave's toolbox still open with the lock and keys lying untouched on top. Assuming Dave had stayed to work overtime, Harry made a few phone calls in an attempt to locate him. When that proved fruitless, Harry left a note for Dave explaining that he had to leave but would be back later. Hours later, when Harry returned to the plant, Dave was still nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, at 7:30 a.m., a furnace operator in Plant 6 made a chilling discovery. He noticed that the furnace's molten salt and lid were coated in a strange black, sticky residue. A sickly odor permeated the area. When he looked closer, the operator thought he saw something even more unsettling, something that kind of looked like a leg. He alerted his supervisor, who inexplicably dismissed his concerns and ordered him to continue working. By 11 p.m. that night, Harry arrived at White Castle for his usual rendezvous with Dave. Dave's car was already parked outside, but something didn't feel right. The car's hood and fender were ice cold, indicating it hadn't been driven recently. Worried, Harry reported Dave missing when he arrived at the facility later that night. A security guard pried open Dave's locker and found his clothes from the previous shift still inside. A search of the facility was launched, but no trace of Dave was found. As the hours passed, company officials contacted the police. The disappearance of Dave Box would soon cast a dark shadow over the already troubled Funal facility. It was soon discovered that Dave had never clocked out that morning. Casey says that she and the family were told on Tuesday night that he was missing. On Wednesday, Carline tried to contact NLO in the facility to find out more information. They told her that they could not give her any information because they did not know anything. But inside the facility, an investigation was confirming the worst. It was learned that at 5:10 a.m. on the morning of Dave's disappearance, the temperature in the furnace in Plant 6, which was kept at a constant 1,350 degrees, had momentarily dipped 28 degrees twice, suggesting that something foreign had been dumped into it. An engineer noted that the time printed on the temperature readouts was about 10 minutes fast, meaning that the temperature drop occurred closer to 5 a.m. A worker had also found what appeared to be a piece of bone on the lip of the furnace. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Department was called in, and at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the furnace was shut down. The investigators had to wait 3 days for the molten liquid inside the furnace to cool. Then, employees sifted through the waste material, searching for some kind of evidence. At one point, they found a set of keys. According to retired Chief Deputy Sheriff Victor Corelli, the keys belonged to Dave's car and 3 of his padlocks. Another key was believed to belong to his house. However, it was bent and in bad shape, so they were unable to prove that. The conclusion was inescapable. Dave was almost certainly dead, but the news left Harry dumbfounded. He claims that Dave's keys were still in his toolbox at 7:30 a.m., more than 2 hours after the gauge in Plant 6 registered the temperature drop. Harry says that when he went into the maintenance room that morning, Dave's keys were in the toolbox. When he left to go home, they were still in the box. When he came back that night, they were, again, still in the box. After Harry noticed the keys that night, one of the supervisors closed the toolbox, put the padlock on it, and took the keys out of the lock. After that point, Harry does not know what happened to the keys. In addition to the keys, investigators uncovered a steel toe and eyelet from a boot, part of what they thought was an eyeglass frame, fragments of what they believed was Dave's walkie-talkie, an alligator clip from a name tag, and a piece of stainless steel wire that was looped together in 3 oddly connected circles. Also recovered were several pieces of human bone. The official police investigation was unable to determine conclusively how Dave died. However, suicide was a distinct possibility. Dave had a history of psychological problems and had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. He also suffered from hallucinations. It has been noted that people with schizophrenia have higher rates of suicide than those without it. During his marriage, he also had problems with alcohol. Around the time of his divorce, he apparently tried to take his own life. Schaus also told police that Dave seemed despondent that night. Casey is certain that Dave did not commit suicide. She says there was no reason for him to do that. He was in perfect health, had recently remodeled his home, had purchased groceries and cigarettes for the week, was planning a vacation with her and Matt for the following summer to Florida, and had paid all of his bills for the month. She had visited him the weekend before his death, and everything seemed normal. He also had not had a breakdown or a suicide attempt since the divorce. His psychiatrist also believed he was not suicidal. Former employee David Day says that based on everything he knows about Dave, his death, and the facility, he believes that Dave was probably lowered into the furnace. He believes that Dave was murdered. He cannot think of any other way it could have happened. He does not believe it could have been suicide or an accident. An accident seems highly unlikely since the furnace is about 4 feet tall and the opening is on top. Dave would have had to climb a ladder and drop through a hole that was just 9 inches by 22 inches. The furnace is also not in the part of the facility where Dave would normally be working. Suicide also seems unlikely. Doctors and scientists noted that Dave most likely would have died before he had the chance to maneuver his entire body through the hole. On the night Dave died, he had been working in Plant 8. According to Cole, Plant 8 had released 4 times more radioactive contaminants into the environment than any other plant at the facility. Cole thinks that Dave was killed because he knew something. He thinks that Dave knew something about Plant 8, about the release of the radioactive contaminants and the threat to public health and the environment. He says it is possible that Dave was a whistleblower or was going to be one. According to his family and co-workers, Dave was a stickler for the rules. He had previously complained to Shouse about another employee sleeping on the job. Harry says that Dave knew about and often warned him about dangerous spots in the plants. His family believes he was going to be a whistleblower regarding the lax safety practices at the facility. Cole believes that Dave was either shot or knocked unconscious. His killer then took his body to Plant 6 and lowered him into the furnace using the loop wire. Cole is not sure if Dave was alive when he was put into the furnace. He hopes that Dave was not conscious. He cannot imagine a more horrible death than that. He believes Dave's death was covered up by N.L.O. and the government. Dave's family believes he was killed, cut in half, and then each half was placed in the furnace. They believe that this explains the 2 separate temperature drops. Deputy Sheriff Corelli says that they never developed any information indicating foul play in Dave's case. He says they had that in the back of their minds, but no one ever gave them any indication or reason to believe that it occurred. Detective Pete Alderucci believes that Dave ran up the ladder and either jumped or dove into the small opening on the furnace. He says he does not believe homicide is possible in Dave's case. He claims that if anyone else tried to put Dave's body in the furnace, they would have burned to death. Harry believes there are people who know what happened to Dave. However, he is not sure if these people would ever come forward or tell anyone about it. He believes they may fear for their lives. Casey says she still has days where she cannot believe Dave is gone. She is very angry about what happened. She says that his family loved him and he loved them, and there was no reason for this to happen. They just want somebody to come forward and tell them any information he or she may have about the case. In September 1984, Dave's family tried to get him declared legally dead so that they could collect his estate. By that point, the police were no longer actively investigating the case. However, the coroner's office never issued a death certificate because of the lack of physical remains. In March 1986, a probate court declared him legally dead. There is a bitter final footnote to Dave's death. Years after the fact, his family is still waiting to lay him to rest. In 1989, the facility was shut down and his remains, a few bone fragments, are presently in a sealed drum on the closed plant site, too toxic to be buried in the ground. Elizabeth Franks was last seen in Toledo, Ohio on April 14, 1965. At the time, she was married to a 20-year-old man, and they lived with their young daughter in an apartment on the 1500 block of Western Avenue. According to her husband, the two had a heated argument after he claimed to have caught her with another man, which led to Elizabeth packing her belongings and leaving their home. This was the last time anyone saw or heard from her. Elizabeth's mother, who last saw her just before Easter in 1965, grew concerned when she went to Elizabeth's apartment a few days later to drop off Easter baskets. No one answered the door, but the landlady let her in, And what Elizabeth's mother found inside was deeply troubling. The apartment was in complete disarray, with torn drapes and clothes strewn everywhere, and the baby's bed had no bedding on it. The landlady also reported hearing loud commotion from the apartment the night before Elizabeth disappeared. Alarmed by what she had seen and heard, Elizabeth's mother immediately reported her missing and even hired a private detective, but no significant leads were found. In the aftermath of Elizabeth's disappearance, her daughter was left without a stable home, first living with her father's relatives, then with her father for a time, and finally being placed in a children's home. Decades later, as an adult, she reconnected with her mother's family, but she still had no answers about what happened to Elizabeth. In 2004, nearly 40 years after Elizabeth vanished, authorities reopened her case, stating they believed she had been murdered. Their conclusion was based on several critical factors, including Elizabeth's complete lack of contact with her family, no activity on her Social Security number since 1965, and the absence of any evidence suggesting she had voluntarily dropped out of sight. Investigators re-interviewed her husband, who had since remarried twice, and labeled him a person of interest, though no new evidence emerged to charge him with any wrongdoing. In 2022, Elizabeth's case briefly resurfaced when dive teams searched a quarry in Genoa, Ohio, following a tip about a submerged vehicle that could be tied to her disappearance. Divers located and pulled 2 cars from the water, but neither was connected to Elizabeth's case, and the search turned up no new clues. Elizabeth's life before her disappearance paints a picture of a young woman deeply rooted in her community. She attended Genoa High School, where she was a member of the chess club, participated in Girl Scouts, and attended a local church. She married after becoming pregnant, and her disappearance just a year later cast a shadow of suspicion over her marriage. The chaotic state of her apartment, the landlady's account of commotion, and her husband's claims all point to a troubling scenario, but no definitive answers have ever surfaced. For nearly 60 years, her case has remained unsolved,